Going back to the point that the spinal cord is a conduit between the periphery and the higher levels of the central nervous system, let's look at how the spinal cord is able to do that. To become aware of the changes in the world around us, the information which arrives to the spinal cord, into the central nervous system, needs to reach our cortex, our brain. And this is possible through tracts, specifically ascending tracts. Similarly, when the cortex makes a decision on a response or movement that needs to reach the periphery through descending or motor tracts. Let's look at those now. As described earlier, the inside butterfly-shaped structure of the spinal cord is the gray matter, and that contains cell bodies and interneurons. So tracts or fiber bundles delivering information to or from the brain will be found in the funiculi, in the white matter. The information what needs to reach the brain would deliver sensory information of general sensation, such as pain, temperature, proprioception, touch, vibration, two-point discrimination. So these are the general sensation delivered up to the brain through two somatosensory pathways, ascending pathways. Pain and temperature will go into one pathway, and that will be called the spinothalamic tract. The others will be carried by the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. Let's look at what happens with the incoming information and how they are carried up towards the brain. When a noxious stimulation, pain or temperature, high heat or very low cold, is carried to the spinal cord, it's carried typically through a sensory nerve, and that sensory nerve will arrive to the dorsal horn, and it will synapse in the gray matter of the dorsal horn to a second order neuron. That second order neuron or interneuron will cross over contralaterally and reaches an area in the ventrolateral funiculus, forming the spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract will carry up in this region, in the ventrolateral funiculus, all the way up to the brainstem. The key points what we need to remember is that pain and temperature is carried in the spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract is already crossed fibers, and that the crossing occurs on the level or a few segments above where the spinal nerve entered the central nervous system. Let's see what happens if the information is not pain and temperature, but deep touch, vibration, or proprioception, or in other words, the joint position information. Again, the information comes through sensory nerves. Sensory nerve arrives to the dorsal horn, or towards the dorsal horn, and then it also gives the axons, gives collaterals to the dorsal funiculus, and they will form the dorsal column tract. The dorsal column tracts won't cross over at this level. They will go all the way up to the brainstem before they will synapse over a second order neuron to cross over to the contralateral side. It is worthwhile to note that the tracts will be bigger and larger as we go rostrally in the spinal cord, as more and more sensory nerves added from higher up the body as the tracts are going more rostrally. So here is a sample of the cervical level of the spinal cord. Here we suddenly will see two sets of tracts within the dorsal column or dorsal funiculus. And this is we can explain this because while here in the lumbar level we only had fibers which came from the legs, and then as we further went up through the thoracic level, some more nerves were added from the trunk. However, as we reach the cervical level, where the innervation of the arm is represented, then you can imagine the large number of cells which have to be added to deliver the very fine touch information to the spinal cord. And the incoming fibers from the arms and fingers and so the upper extremity will push the already existing fiber bundles to the midline, towards the midline, crashing them against the midline to wedge themselves in between the space between the gray matter and the remaining white matter. Consequently, the more fragile looking or narrow looking tract is called the gracile tract, while the more lateral one, representing all the fiber bundles coming from the upper extremities, will be called the cuneate tract, coming from the Latin word for wedge. So if we compare the two pathways, they both deliver, the information is delivered through a sensory nerve which arrives to the dorsal horn, while in the spinothalamic tract it will cross over to the other side and carries contralaterally up to the thalamus. While the dorsal column pathway is again coming through the sensory nerve posterior horn, but keeping ipsilaterally until it comes up to the medulla, where it will cross over to the other side and then continues on to the thalamus. Let's look at some rule of thumb relating to the ascending tracts. 1. The primary neuron is always a sensory neuron which delivers the sensory information from the periphery to the central nervous system. 2. The secondary nerve or second order neuron is the one which decussates. We also know that the second order neuron will deliver the information to the thalamus. And finally, that after synapsing on the third order neuron in the thalamus, the third order neuron will deliver the information to the brain, to the sensory center, the somatic sensory center of a post-central gyrus. The difference between the spinothalamic tract and the dorsal column is where they are found in the spinal cord, and also where the synapse over the second order neuron and consequently their decussation happens. The spinothalamic tract is synapsing on the level in the spinal cord and synapses the second order neuron, then crossing over and decussating and ascending in the contralateral side, while the dorsal column will not synapse over the second order neuron until it reaches the brainstem, and thereby it will decussate in the brainstem before it reaches the thalamus. We should mention two more sensory tracts which also carry proprioceptive information. However, they don't carry it to a conscious level because they carry it to the cerebellum. And these are the ventral and the dorsal spinocerebellar tracts. They will carry the information to the ipsilateral hemisphere of the cerebellum. However, while the dorsal spinocerebellar tract will ascend ipsilaterally all the way in the spinal cord and reaches the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, the ventral spinocerebellar tract crosses over close to its entry to the central nervous system, ascends in the spinal cord contralaterally, and reaches all to the midbrain when it then crosses back over and reaches the cerebellum through the superior cerebellar peduncle. These tracts are found in the very lateral side of the lateral funiculus on both sides. Dorsal spinocerebellar and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. To add the already known somatosensory and conscious sensory tracts, let's add the spinothalamic and the dorsal column medial lemniscus tracts here.